Good morning. My name is Stawinski, and I have the privilege of being the 17th Chief of Police of the Prince George's County Police Department. I want to thank the Director for having me, Howard, for introducing me, because I stand before you today as an unapologetic advocate of research and police science. I think, for reasons that I'll detail briefly, that's really where the future lies. When I'm asked about policing and research, my friend Charles and I'm reminded of Will Rogers. Its applicability to the real world was the question. Will Rogers said, it's okay to be on the right track, but if you just sit there, sooner or later you're going to get run over. And that's where the application of research to the real world is the vital component in contemplating what we choose to take interest in from a research perspective. So a little bit of history about my department and my journey. 6 years ago, under Chief McGaw, we elected to restructure the department to be a strategy-based, prevention-oriented organization capable of producing strategic policies and plans that would achieve structural reductions in crime. Because what we knew looking at this was that crime was overrepresented when we looked at indicators in Prince George's County: economic, educational attainment, employment, infrastructure. There was just too much of it. One of the first things that we did was to hire, and his name was mentioned this morning, Carlos Acosta, our Inspector General, who came from DOJ, to help us on this journey. One of the first things we did was go to the University of Maryland, which had not happened before, and speak to an internationally recognized thinker around these issues. You see, what we're trying to do is think comprehensively. And I'm going to take a moment's liberty and just talk about that word, because comprehensively, and a lot of times in law enforcement, is concluded to mean about crime and the hard facts of crime. It was mentioned today about some of the results of the study in Boston and about mistrust in the community, particularly around young people. Those soft issues of relationships are equal in value to this department and equal in terms of efforting to our research. I call it the hard work of small things. Things that you don't hear about on the news, things that you won't hear about in the national press, but conversations that happen in church basements and in schools and on the side of the road are as valuable as the work that these individuals do. And when you translate that across an entire department, it accounts for credibility. Credibility is what allows us to take some of these strategies forward. And when people understand, and again, you can't trust people you don't know, when people understand the research basis for some of these strategies and why we're doing what we're doing, and you explain that as you launch those strategies, then you eliminate misunderstanding, and you bring in more collaborative efforts, you can be more successful. You heard a lot from eminent thinkers in public health, and I fully acknowledge that that wasn't always the case in Prince George's County. We weren't looking at it as a public health issue, but what we said 6 years ago was, let's take this from the perspective of a proven science, epidemiology. Let's look at all of the causative factors of crime as opposed to what we traditionally have been very good at, which is dealing with offenders. And out of that, we concluded that if we're going to take an epidemiological view on things, what we know from that science is that there are structural things that you can do to impact the outbreak of disease. And what I'll suggest that we're in the midst of doing in Prince George's County, I'm hoping as part of my advocacy to do on a broader basis, is understand that crime isn't a giant mystery, that there are underlying structures that these individuals and others out there right now are helping us to identify that can lead to structural methodologies that we can implement and get real results from. It's not entirely art. And I will say that sometimes it will not work. But as Thomas Edison once remarked, I didn't fail in inventing the light bulb 10,000 times. I learned 10,000 ways not to make the incandescent light bulb. And we learn as much from those failures as we do from some of our successes. it's important to take that risk and to learn. At the very least, you now know what you didn't know before. And these can be tremendously beneficial frameworks, not only for formulating effective strategy, but for accounting to the public why certain strategies have not produced the results that they would have liked to have seen. And going back to thinking comprehensively, here I've got to talk about Daniel Board and Bill McMullen, my good friends at the ATF. Ross is here with us today. We have 11 investigators assigned to a task force with ATF full-time. Their job is to understand how guns are coming into Prince George's County, because at the end of that process, we believe that behind the static of violent crime, let me take a step back. For a long time in Prince George's County, the gun was viewed as freight to the crime. It was an armed robbery with a gun. It was drug dealing with a gun. It was a footnote. It was another charge that was added to the principal. What we've done is change that. The gun now becomes the focus. It's no longer freight. And we want to understand where those guns are coming from, because at the end of the day, there aren't 10,000 independent actors selling these guns. There are a handful of actors who for a long time have bore no scrutiny whatsoever. They've provided the weapons to people who have gone and committed the robberies or dealt the drugs, but no one's come knocking on their door. And so why we're committed to this with the ATF, and why we'll continue to be committed to it, is that we believe that as we learn who these individuals are who are providing the majority of weapons, and we start knocking on their doors, we're going to impact what? Their behavior. Because right now it doesn't matter to them who they sell a weapon to. They have to do no mental calculus about whether or not it's likely this person will use a weapon. We intend to shift that calculus, because if they learn that selling the weapon to the person who's more inclined to use it will lead to a knock on their door and accountability on their part, then while I won't say that at this point we hope to completely eliminate illegal firearms in Prince George's County, certainly the people who are sophisticated enough to be trading in them will have to change their behavior, and from that change we'll see reductions in the number of firearms in the hands of people who are likely to use them and the number of instances. And this comes back to something I talk about quite a bit in my department, which is the Ted Williams principle. We operate our department in real time based on data. It looks like that every day. And my entire command staff knows exactly what all this means. But it's not perfection that we're looking for. It's not the notion that data is going to get us to the right choice at every point. But Ted Williams successfully hit 4 out of every 10 pitches that were thrown at him. And he's our most accomplished hitter in baseball. And that's the same principle in policing. You don't have to get it right 100% of the time. But if you get it right 4 out of 10 times, you're a superstar. So from the epidemiology perspective, if we conclude that that will lead us to a better understanding of the dynamics of gun violence, we must also conclude as part of that conversation that that will lead to structures that can be effective and can be applied in different places and be effective in different places. And we can advance, again, where I started, the science of policing. This leads to where I'll conclude and open it up to conversation, the county executive's signature Transforming Neighborhoods initiative. Because at the end of all of this, the hard issues of crime and the soft issues of relationships, we also have to look critically at that environment. We also have to marshal our resources as government and not just deal with any of these issues through the lens of policing. We tried that for a long time. We weren't successful. But when we were able to marshal all of the components of county government around those issues of environment, we made tremendous progress quickly. And coming back full circle to the soft issues, what we also did was earn credibility in a community that allows us to go and to police effectively with respect for their views on how policing should be done, but also to introduce new ideas and to experiment with better approaches. And the question is, does it work? And here's where I'll conclude my portion. When we started this work almost 6 years ago, we had better than 38,000 instances of crime in Prince George's County. And as I stand here today, last year we had less than 19,000. And right now, we've created a 13% reduction year to date for 2016. We've reduced violent crime this year another 6%. And for the first 10 years of the 2000s, where we had more than 120 homicides on average, we now have about 62 on average for the last 3 years. So does police science work? Does research have value? That was what I was asked to address at the conclusion of their remarks. And I will say to you in conclusion that research is the underpinning of every decision that I make as the chief and every decision that our commanders make, fiscally, strategically, and in terms of the deployment of resources to good effect. So I appreciate the work that's been done. I appreciate my good friend Charles. And with that, I'll conclude. Thank you.